friend, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to sit down with you and share my birth story. This is the birth story of my first birth. So it's been a little while now. My daughter Avila turned 3 in April. So it's been 3 years and some change since I gave birth to her. And I wanted to share because this is really the birth story that kicked me into my passion for birth, like my full-on passion. I was passionate about it before, but when I gave birth to Avila, that kind of changed everything for me. And so I couldn't believe that I had never really shared publicly about it online, especially because the testimony I just feel like is so incredible. And my birth story with her is insane. Usually when I tell people, it's kind of just like, yeah, I can't believe that happened either. I still can't when I look back on it, but I love sharing about it because it was amazing and God gets all of the glory for my birth story with her. These are definitely, obviously, intimate moments to be sharing online, but I love talking about birth in general. But when it's my own, obviously sometimes that can feel a little bit vulnerable, but at the same time, I hope that it encourages you because this labor was nothing like I expected it to be, and it really instilled in me this just deep trust in the birth process and this deep love for it. And I honestly went in pretty afraid and prepared for it to be just really long, really painful, really scary. Not to diminish that is a lot of people's experience, but it wasn't mine. So I hope that in listening to this, you feel encouraged and yeah, excited. And now before I go any farther, just to caveat, a big part of this birth story is going to be a testimony of just God's faithfulness. So this isn't just me sharing my birth story because I want to share my birth story. It's a testimony to how God showed up for me in this specific way in my life, because it was really beautiful to see his faithfulness through all of this. So anyways, fast forward a little bit into the pregnancy. I had just started my first nursing job at the time, and I was working in a large women's hospital as a women's fellowship nurse, and it was real rough at the beginning of my pregnancy. I had severe morning sickness. I was working night shifts, and not only that, but it was a really tiring job, not just physically, but emotionally, because I had just gone through a loss. I was now pregnant again, and I was surrounded by pregnancy and birth all the time. And that came with both the good parts and the bad parts, as you can probably imagine. So as I was in that position, I was seeing a lot. I was learning a lot. I was seeing a lot of different types of birth and types of care that people were receiving. My husband and I ultimately made the decision that I did not want the type of birth that I had been seeing at the hospital I worked at. I just wanted something different, and I ultimately decided to give birth at a birth center. It was a freestanding birth center. I decided that I felt more peace about having an out-of-hospital birth. So anyways, fast forward to maybe like 36 weeks or so, I had been preparing. My husband and I had done a lot of reading, and we took a birth course. We had hired a doula who was incredible. We're doing all the preparation, all the things, and a lot of learning that, a lot of it was unlearning because I was learning so much in my job, but it was from a very medicalized perspective. It was very different than what I was learning about birth outside of the hospital. So anywho, fast forward to like 36 weeks, I had done a lot of preparation, but not a lot of like praying over this birth and what I wanted it to look like. And I remember one day I just felt like God had put it on my heart, go to the chapel and pray. I felt really overwhelmed during this season of life. We were going through lots of big life changes. So not only was I about to have a baby soon, but my husband just left his job and we had just bought a house and we didn't know what was next. We planned to stay in Steubenville where we were located, and for him to finish his counseling degree and him just get a new job and for us to live in this house, and nothing was working out. Like doors were constantly being shut in our face. It was just very overwhelming. I was about to have a baby. It was a lot. So I felt like God invited me to just come spend some time with him. I remember feeling like he asked me, which it's interesting. At this time in my walk with the Lord, I didn't have a prayer life where I felt like I was constantly hearing God clearly. I don't feel like I often just heard his voice, and yeah, it was hard for me to discern that. Like I would pray, but I wasn't hearing him regularly. So this was new for me. It's not like this happened all the time. I feel like I heard him say to me, "What do you want?" And I was kind of taken aback by that. I was like, okay, Lord, I want Nick to have a stable job. I want him to be able to finish his degree. I want us to be able to land on a plan before I have this baby. All the things about our life circumstance that I felt overwhelmed with. And I remember just feeling this peace. I remember hearing him say, I have that. Trust me, I have that. What do you want for this birth? And I remember being like, what? Why is God asking me what I want for this birth? It feels weird. How specific can I get? Like, am I going to really sit here and talk to Jesus about my birth plans? And I felt just this invitation, like, yeah, I care about this and I want to know what you want for this birth. I prayed, and I prayed for a lot of things that I felt ridiculous even admitting that I wanted. Like, I really wanted to give birth at the birth center. I really wanted to not be induced. There was like a whole list of things that I was really hopeful for. And then I just felt like God put it on my heart to ask for a pain-free birth, which sounds crazy. I didn't even really realize that this was a thing at this point. I think I had just maybe started to hear a couple of stories of women who had had pain-free births, but it was not an expectation that I had. Like, certainly did not expect labor or birth to be pain-free, but I felt like God invited me to ask him for that. So I did, and I felt like he just put this verse on my heart, Ephesians 3:20, which is, our God is, well, it says, unto him who is able to do immeasurably more than we ask, think, or imagine. And so I was like, okay, I feel like you're asking me to ask you boldly, so I will. And that verse became the anthem of my life. Like, it's been the anthem of my life for the past 3 years since this experience. Anyways, I know that I'm getting very rambly about the like pre-labor and birth context, but I feel like it's important to the overall story. So I did that. I continued to pray on that. And I had a friend who was pregnant at the same time as me. We had due dates a month apart, but she was due almost exactly a month after I was. She was due May 4th. I was due April 6th. And like, I knew in theory that your due date is just a number and you can't really count on going exactly at 40 weeks, but still, I was like really thinking that I was going to go early. I had had tons of Braxton Hicks. I stopped working at like 38 and a half weeks because I constantly thought I was going into labor. Everybody in my work was like, you need to stop working. Like, you have contractions every time that you work all the time. You need to go home and chill. So I stopped working at 38 and a half weeks, thinking I was going to go into labor anytime now, any day. Every night I would have contractions. I would think, is it time? And this went on for weeks. So I decided to just distract myself as best as I could, but I started getting extremely discouraged at this point. But at the same time, I was home from work. My husband still had a full-time job, and I was very, very pregnant. So I started to really take the spiritual preparation seriously. I was diving into my word. I was praying and seeking God every day about pregnancy, about birth. I was, trying to encourage my spirit with positive birth stories. And I just really decided to take this time to prepare and relax myself and give everything over to God. So that was like every day. I was taking a bath every single night, listening to like Christian hypnobirthing meditations, and I was praying. I was doing all the exercises. We were doing a mile circuit like every single night. And I had told you I was due on April 6th. So the more pregnant that I got, like I passed my due date, and I was 41 weeks, I think, at this point. And I was like, God is saving my labor for Good Friday. That's what he's doing. I just know it in my spirit. Like, it's going to be so redemptive, this redemptive suffering. And like, it's going to be this beautiful Good Friday birth. And it's going to be so fun. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I was convinced that I was going to go into labor on Good Friday. Good Friday, I wake up. I'm 41 weeks and 3 days pregnant at this point. I was over it, okay? I was over it. And I look at my phone, and the first thing that I see is a text message from my friend who is also pregnant, 37 weeks pregnant on the dot on Good Friday, saying, hey guys, my water broke this morning. I'm headed into the birth center. I was floored. I was like, are you literally joking right now? Are you kidding me? This cannot be happening to me. Like, I was happy for her, but I also was like, really? Like, this is her day? This is supposed to be my day, God. Like, I'm supposed to went to labor today. I'm over 41 weeks pregnant and she just turned 37 weeks pregnant. So I was upset, just to say the least. I cried. I had this huge emotional release. And I remember looking up positive birth stories because I think I looked up supernatural birth stories. And this girl's birth story came up, who I actually had been watching on YouTube for a while, but I had never seen this video before. Her name is Alyssa Dene. Her YouTube channel is Wonderful Acts. And I love her YouTube channel because she just tells testimonies of God's goodness in her life, and it's amazing. So anyways, I watched her birth story, and at the very end, she said, in Isaiah, God says, shall I, the Lord your God, bring a child to the point of delivery and not cause it to bring forth, or something like that. And I was like, oh, wow. And then she continues talking, and I felt really convicted by that word. And at the very end, she says, and remember, God can do immeasurably more than all we ask, think, or imagine. Ephesians 3:20. And I was just like, wow, that was for me. Like, God, you just gave me that word. I was stunned and I was just like in awe, and I felt like he just spoke directly into my fears and soothed me like a father. I literally, like, I was crying like a child. I was so upset that I wasn't getting my way, and I feel like God just swooped me up like a father and was like, I'm with you and this is part of my plan. I felt an immense amount of peace from that point on, but I was still over being pregnant and I still really did not want to be induced. So I was going this point every couple of days to the birth center to get non-stress tests to check up and make sure that baby was still okay and healthy, since I had passed that 41-week mark. And I also at this point had gotten multiple membrane sweeps because I wanted labor to move along. They were very invasive and do not recommend personally. And I had taken castor oil not once, not twice, but 3 times at this point to try to start labor. Do not do it. Okay, it didn't work. It was extremely unpleasant if you know anything about castor oil. And yeah, it didn't send me into labor. So don't recommend. My body clearly was not ready at this point, and I wouldn't do this if I had to go back in time. But at the time, you have to think, I was still a nurse. I was very had a somewhat medicalized mindset still, and I just wanted to be done being pregnant, and I really didn't want to be induced and have a hospital birth, especially where I was working at the time. So I was there for an NST and a membrane sweep, and this midwife, who I loved, she ended up being the one who helped me deliver Avila. I really, really liked her. It was a rotating practice, but she was my favorite the whole time that I was there. She ended up saying, okay, you know what, let's make a plan. I told her I really did not want to transfer care. They were like, you can transfer to McGee, which is a hospital that I worked at, and you can choose to schedule an induction with their providers there, or we can try to break your water here at the birth center and see if it starts anything. I have to say, now we live in Texas. Midwifery is much less highly regulated here in Texas than it was up in Pennsylvania. So they had to abide by my 42-week mark. Like, the moment that I turned 42 weeks, I risked out of birth center care. And I don't love that. There's a lot I could say, but this is just the reality of the situation. My options at this point were either schedule an induction at the hospital, have them break my water when I turned 42 weeks, or wing it, like free birth basically, or like just show up at the hospital in labor. And I didn't feel comfortable with either of the other two. I also did not feel right about just winging it or birthing on my own, which, yeah, that wouldn't have been the right decision for me. So I did feel peace about letting them attempt to start labor. And in my mind, the logic was like, okay, well, if they break my water and nothing happens, I'm gonna have to transfer care anyways the next day for an induction because I'll risk out of care. So I might as well just have them try it and we'll see, because they're going to break my water during a hospital induction either way. So at 41 weeks and 6 days pregnant, you can imagine I was so afraid that my story would be like the countless other stories that I had heard, needing to go into the hospital for XYZ reason, to be induced, to be augmented, unable to handle the intensity of that, getting an epidural that I ultimately just didn't want to get, and then possibly getting a C-section because of all the interventions. So we put it on the books, kind of scheduled like a fake induction almost, At 41 weeks and 6 days in the morning, I was to go to the birth center and they would break my water and see if it started labor. So the night before, my husband and I decided to go on a little date. I got a prenatal massage. We ate dinner, had a little glass of wine, like half a glass of wine to relax. We just had a really nice, pleasant night, just the two of us, knowing that the next day we were going into the birth center. One of the things I had prayed for that I wrote down about my labor is that I would get to go to Mass the day that I had my daughter. I just felt convicted about that. Something I've been doing for years and years, ever since I converted to Catholicism, was that anytime I would have cramps with my period, I would offer those up that my future children might love the Eucharist. And I think I got that idea from somebody else, but it's something I had been doing for years at this point. All through my dating relationship with my husband, I had been offering up my period cramps for my future children that they might love the Eucharist. I really wanted to receive Jesus the day that I gave birth. When it came to the induction that was scheduled, it was 8 a.m., I think, and they did 6:30 Mass where my husband and I lived at the time. So we woke up that morning and we went to 6:30 Mass before we headed into the birth center. So we got into the car after Mass, we started driving, and it was about an hour, give or take, commute into the city, which is crazy to think about because I literally had been working in the city at this time, commuting an hour back and forth while pregnant. But so yeah, we went in, and like halfway through the drive, I started to notice that I was having contractions. Now, this wasn't super new for me. Like I said, I've been having tons of Braxton Hicks leading up to actual birth, but it was different. I noticed that rather than it was a different kind of crampiness. And the thing that was most notably different is that they were timeable. So I had been having a lot of contractions before, but they were never consistent. They would be like 3 minutes, then 4 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 2 minutes. Like they would not ever be equidistant, if that makes sense. I was having these cramps and I was keeping an eye on the clock like loosely, and I noticed that they were all 6 to 7 minutes apart in length. But we were about to go into the birth center anyways, so I didn't really take note of it too much. It was something that I noticed. And when I got there, I told them about it, and she kind of was like, okay. And looking back, I think that was the start of my early labor. But given the circumstances, it just wasn't something that they took into account very much. So I got to the birth center at 8:30. And I was checked because that was part of what they had to do in order to break my water, was check to make sure that the station of the baby was good, meaning that baby was low enough and that everything looked okay and safe for them to go ahead and break my water. And I told them to not tell me dilation at this point. I was like, please don't tell me dilation. I don't want to know, which I think was an amazing idea. I think I would have been encouraged by the number, but I'm still really happy I didn't know what it was, because that can get so in your head and it sets you up to have all these sorts of expectations for the way your labor is going to go. And it's a big recommendation I make for my students inside my birth course and my doula clients is, if you're going to be checked, don't have them relay that information to you, especially if it's going to be like at the very beginning, because chances are it's not going to feel encouraging, or if it is encouraging, it's going to give you expectations that might not come to fruition the way you're hoping. So anyways, I was checked. And I knew that that number was arbitrary, but I was 4 centimeters. They didn't tell me that at the time, but I was 4 centimeters. And then I was not checked again at any point during my labor. I'm sure that was not what I expected, and that was not what they expected, but it's how it happened. So I was 4 centimeters. They went ahead and they broke my water. Many women say that this is really painful, but I did not experience this as painful. It really just was like they took the tool, which is called an amni hook. They broke my water, and it felt like I was peeing myself, except for I wasn't peeing. That's what a lot of women say it feels like when their water breaks. And in my second birth, when my water broke, that's how it felt. There was a little bit of meconium in the water, but it was light meconium. So it wasn't really like thick or dark green or anything like that. It was very light. And that was kind of to be expected, given that I was 42 weeks pregnant pretty much at this point. So she checks me. I put on basically like a diaper in order to catch any fluid or anything. I had prepared myself for a really long early labor, which is typical for a first-time mom, first-time labor. I expected that we would need to do more than just break my water to get things moving along. And my team also thought that. So the plan was essentially like break my water and have me pump 15 minutes on each side and then take a little rest and then keep pumping until contractions picked up. And then I'm assuming that they were going to give me castor oil if contractions didn't pick up at that point. It didn't end up really happening that way. What we ended up doing is settling into the room. My water was now broken. I didn't feel a huge difference at this point. Contractions didn't start like right away. We set up a movie because I was thinking, oh, it's early labor. I'll need to distract myself. And so I remember we set up Beauty and the Beast, like the live action Disney version, on our iPad, which is so funny to think back on now. And I sat down on a birth ball and I started pumping with like a Medela pump on each side. I started pumping and immediately I started having these very strong contractions. And I was like, whew, that's a lot more intense than I thought that it would be for early labor. I immediately felt so overstimulated and so frustrated that I took the iPad. I was in the middle of a contraction. This movie was playing in the background, and I took the iPad and I threw it across the room. Like, I was not using my rational brain, but I think if you've ever had a baby before and you have been mid-contraction and people are like talking at you or something like that, it can be just so overstimulating. It's the worst feeling ever. And so I think that I just felt that in my body. And I threw the iPad and immediately was like, that's not the thing for right now. Like, distraction is not going to work. That's not it. And I just intuitively knew. I think I had one more strong contraction and I intuitively knew like pumping is not it right now if these are to continue like this. I think my body just knew, well, I needed like that little bit of oxytocin, I think, to get things started. And then my body knew that it was going to take over on its own and that I needed to not pump, because I told my nurse, I was like, I am having really strong contractions now. I don't think that I need to continue pumping, or like I just want to take a minute. And I think that in the back of her head, she was kind of like, well, yeah, this is labor. Like, this is what we want. We want to induce contractions. They are supposed to be intense. But I just knew that I needed to take a minute and then maybe return to it later. My contractions just continued to pick up in intensity. So I think I had a few more, and I don't really remember if this is where it starts to get like a little bit fuzzy and blurry. And it has been 3 years since this happened. So I don't remember every detail perfectly, but we have some footage, and I will insert footage and pictures and things in this video. But I think at this point I started to have really strong contractions. I think I was like, I want to change into my clothes that I want to actually labor in. At this point, I thought I would have a really long early labor and just be kind of chilling for a long time. But it was already like my contractions, I don't know how far apart they were. Maybe like 3 to 5 minutes apart at this point. If I had to guess based on like the labors I've been a part of and seen, I was in active labor. My assumption, knowing now how dilated I was, is that when they broke my water, my daughter's head probably dropped onto my cervix and dilated me maybe to like a 5 or 6. And it kicked me into active labor. But I didn't know at the time, like I hadn't been through this before. I assumed I still had a long way to go, but it was already pretty intense. I tried to do that and it was kind of hard to move around through the contractions. I really had to pause and like focus with everything in me. I got down on the birth ball for a little bit and then I think I threw up. And I want to say that was like less than an hour after them breaking my water. Like, it was not very long afterwards. And it was really surprising. And I still remember my nurse being like, maybe we should give your doula a call. Like, you might need some extra support. And I was kind of like, it feels kind of early for that, but okay. And again, I think we're all just kind of assuming I was not that far along at this point into the process and that we still had a while to go. And I think at some point in all of this, I sat on the toilet for a little bit of time. And I don't know what made me say this to my nurse, but at some point, I think somewhat shortly after throwing up, I said to her, hey, you know what? My mom had a really fast labor with me. And she was like, okay, yeah, but like, what number baby were you? And I was like, I'm an only child. And I really didn't consider that when considering what my labor would look like. I did not have any expectation of my labor being quick. But I do know that my mom had a really quick labor with me. And that is way more typical of like second, third, and beyond babies. First labors usually take a little while longer, which again, I had no expectation of. But I just, for some reason, felt like I had to say that to her. I was like, my mom had a fast labor and I'm an only child. And so she was like, I think based on how you're acting right now, it was probably like an hour, maybe a couple hours into the process, I was really like contracting regularly. They were really strong. I was really having to focus. She was like, you can probably get into the tub if you want to use the tub. And I just remember thinking it feels really soon for that, but I do more than anything just want to get in the water. Like, yes, 100% with my whole being, that is what I want. So rather than changing into the gown that I thought I was going to be in during labor, I changed into my swimsuit top. And I got into the tub, and my husband put on worship music. And I had this playlist. If you want to find it, it's called Birth Looks a Lot Like Real Christian Love, which is a quote from Mary Hazeltine's book, Made for This. I love that quote, but that's the playlist, and it's just a worship, like a birth worship playlist, and I love it. And he put that on. He kind of set the atmosphere, started diffusing some essential oils, put on like some candles. And I just remember at that point, everything seemed to melt away. And I was like so in a zone. I was not expecting things to pick up like this for honestly like hours and hours. I was expecting to have hours and hours of just chilling, distracting myself, and doing other things before it intensified. But I was like, I really want to get in the water. When she suggested it, I was like, I think that you're right. I think that's a great idea. So I got in the tub, the mood was set, and I still remember we were obviously no longer at a point in my labor where we needed to really encourage things to move along, which was such a gift because one of my biggest fears was having an induction. And even though I did technically have an induction, I thought there was a pretty high chance that I was going to need a lot of medical intervention in order for my body to go into labor. But my biggest fear was that I would end up with all these interventions to start or encourage labor to move along, and that didn't happen. And I was so, other than obviously it's a big intervention that they broke my water, but I never had Pitocin or any of the other things that I was just so not wanting. So it was a huge gift that all it took was them breaking my water and me pumping for like a few minutes. That little bit of oxytocin plus them breaking my water seemed to just kick my body right into gear. Now, I have to say, after being a labor and delivery nurse, it's obvious to me now that my body was pretty ready at this point. Being 4 centimeters dilated with a really thin cervix is a really encouraging place to start labor when you are a first-time mom. And it also shows me that those weeks and weeks of contractions, even though very mentally draining, they were obviously doing something to prepare my body. And sometimes you just have labors like that where lots of work is done on the front end before actual labor. And like that's what I said with prodromal labor, a lot of the time it's the body's way of preparing itself, getting baby into a good position and preparing the cervix to really fully open up when time comes. And then when labor actually starts, sometimes it's really speedy. Not always, but in my case, that's what happened. I guess spoiler alert. So anyways, we turn on worship. I remember we had set up a crucifix and like holy water and some flameless candles on the bed frame, which was right across from the tub I was in. I can insert a picture. It was really beautiful. And that was kind of my focal point that I focused on. I remember this worship song by Maverick City, Lean Back, came on. That's the moment I remember specifically in my mind that things just really shifted. I remember hearing that and just getting like so emotional and feeling God's presence so thick in the room. And my husband and I were holding hands and we looked at each other and just started to tear up. And it just felt like the entire atmosphere shifted in that moment. I felt all the pain and tension that I had been feeling, which wasn't considerable, but it was intense. It was really intense. I felt all the pain and tension in that moment leave my body. And I just felt like I entered all of a sudden into this deep state of just like prayer and relaxation and worship. And I was breathing through my contractions and just relaxing through them. And I felt like it was so natural. Like my body just felt like it was floating in the water. And well, it's hard for me to talk about this sometimes because it was such a beautiful birth experience. I know that this is not everybody's experience and I never want to have it come off like my labor was just so perfect and so easy and da-da-da. None of these things were by my own strength. This was seriously a gift from God. I think that every woman has a different path to holiness ultimately and different wounds and a different background and different things going on. And for whatever reason, God gave me this labor experience as a gift. I really think now looking back so that I could more fully trust in him. I definitely was battling with some trust wounds. And I think that he gave me this experience so that I could just more fully trust that he had good things in mind for me. So I also think a factor in this is I had waited so long for labor to start, and I was so anxious for labor to start that when contractions intensified and my labor started, I was so grateful to be experiencing every single contraction because all I wanted was to go into labor, that it didn't feel like scary. I wasn't bracing myself against it. I was very actively welcoming every single contraction because I was so happy to be in labor. And I was very much like grateful for the intensity I was experiencing, both physically and spiritually, because it was also very spiritually intense in the most beautiful way. So yeah, I was in the tub. I think that most of the time I was leaning back, supported by kind of like this pool noodle, and genuinely just like relaxing through them. For a while, I was in that position. I think that then I got into a squat position at one point. I definitely got out of the tub at one point and went to the bathroom because I started to feel some pressure. And it kind of felt like I needed to poop. So I went to the bathroom and I just wanted to be alone. And at this point, I think I just went in the bathroom. I kind of closed the door and I labored on the toilet for a while, sitting backward. And I was just completely in the dark, alone with just me and Jesus for a little bit. Nick came into the bathroom with me when I was laboring. Maybe he like rubbed my back or something at this point. My doula was here at this point also. I don't honestly even remember at what point she showed up because I was already kind of in such a zone. So yeah, I think I get back into the tub after being in the bathroom for a little while, and I was maybe on all fours for a bit. I was just really laboring, like really just intense. The world around me was very much like melting away at this point. I was doing nothing but listening, like hyper focused on the worship music and on breathing through my contractions. But it was just this amazing thing where I had no fear and I was very tuned into what my body was doing and I was giving it literally all my attention. And I just felt like God was so close. It was like if you have ever put on a worship song and been like so engrossed in the feeling of the presence of God while you worship. It was like that, but more intense than I had ever experienced before, which is such a gift, like so amazing. And labor, I feel, can really do that to you when the environment is respected and when there is reverence around you and your team is like fully, just respecting your space and interceding for you. My doula and my husband certainly were. And so I just created this environment of like being peaceful and allowing me to really pray. And I just felt like God was so tangibly close. Like I felt like I could literally kiss him. He just felt so close. That's not every birth and every labor. My second labor really wasn't like that, but it was just a gift again for this particular labor. So at a certain point, I remember feeling like the only position that was comfortable for me to be in was squatting, supported with my husband behind me. So I felt like the only position I could really be in was like squatting in the tub with like most of my belly covered by the warm water, but with him holding me up. So he was like bearing the weight of most of my body at this point. And I remember in my head being like, okay, movement is important. Movement is important. I can't just stay in this position forever. But I didn't want to move and I tried. I think that this was my brain pulling me out of my body, which I talk a lot about in my birth course. One thing that's so important for labor is like tuning into your primal brain in a way that you're not in your thinking state. You can't think a baby out, and you should have a lot of tools in your back pocket and knowledge, and you should prepare. Preparation is really, really important. But when you prepare so that when push comes to shove, you can just tune everything out and listen to your body. You don't prepare so that you can pass a test and like have all the knowledge and implement all the knowledge. That's not where your brain needs to be when you're in labor. And I think that I knew motion was important. And so I thought myself out of the position that my body intuitively wanted to be in. And that's when I started to experience some pain with labor. So I moved out of that supported squat into a lunge in the tub. I got on all fours and I put one of my legs up in a lunge position. And it was so intense and it just did not feel right. So I remember being in that lunge and I like moaned pretty loudly. Like I remember I was like, ah, at the peak of the contraction. And that's the only time that I ever got loud during my labor and that was kind of painful. Being in that position, I moved back to the position that I was in beforehand because it just intuitively did not feel right. So I moved back into that supported squat and I, for whatever reason, during my contractions, had to, again, just focus all my energy on getting through them and relaxing through them. I was not making noise. I was not expressing anything externally. In the footage, you will see that I just tuck my chin and completely am like silent during my contractions. I know at a certain point my husband was doing, or maybe my doula was doing counter pressure. One of them was doing counter pressure. The other one was pouring warm water on my back, which was so relaxing and so nice, like over my shoulders, over my low back. I had a fan in my face, again, blurry. I don't remember words that were exchanged during that time. I do know when I let out that yell, my midwife and nurse weren't in the room the whole time, but I know when I let out that yell, my midwife peeked her head in and she asked my husband, was that her? And he was like, yeah, but I don't remember any words of exchange. I was just so focused and deep in, like I was in labor land. I really was. So anyways, was just really in a zone. At a certain point, when I was in that deep squat, I was just kind of like tucking my chin and no sounds were coming in my mouth. And I remember I started to feel a lot of rectal pressure, but I don't think I voiced that out loud to anyone. I just didn't feel like saying anything. Again, none of my energy could be used to like express outwardly. So I started to feel a lot of rectal pressure. And at a certain point, I started to feel my body involuntarily push. Like at a certain point, the peak of the contraction, I could not help but bear down, which that's called the Ferguson reflex. And so I started to experience that and I could not help but push. I really wanted her to be born gently. Like I just knew intuitively as I was pushing, again, like did not have a plan that it was going to go this way, but I just knew intuitively that I needed to really try to breathe through that sensation to push and be as gentle as possible and not actively bear down with it. That's different in every labor and every birth, but I knew intuitively that I needed to not bear down with that sensation, which praise God, because there's more to the story. And I think that was my body's way of protecting itself. So really wanted her to be born gently, but I also remember being really confused at a certain point when I started to feel that sensation, because I thought there was no way in heck. I was like, there is literally no way in heck that I can be pushing right now. Like this is impossible. I think at this point it was maybe like a little bit before 1 p.m. If I were to look at the clock, that's probably around when it was, because I think she was born at like 1:55. Yeah, I think she was born sometime in the 1 o'clock hour. And this was like right before 1 that I started to feel this sensation. And I just remember being confused. I was like, this could not possibly be happening right now, because it had been all of like 4.5 hours at this point. And I really did not expect her to be born even that day. Like I was going into this thinking that she would be born sometime past midnight that night, or maybe even the next day. Really did not think that it would be that fast. So was in shock. At this point, it had been like 4 hours since my water had broken, but I just knew what was happening in my body. And I knew that I just needed to listen to myself. And my team was very supportive of that as well. They were not like interjecting. Granted, there might have been an element of like, I didn't tell them what was going on at all. At a certain point, though, they did catch on to the fact that I was pushing. And they did not try to like check my cervix. They did not tell me what to do. They were just very encouraging. They were like, listen to your body. It's okay to bear down a little bit if you want to bear down, but you don't have to. I told them I don't want to because I want my baby to be born gently. And they were just all kind of sitting and squatting around the tub. I remember my doula was singing harmonies to the worship music while she was like putting water on my back, and it was just beautiful. They would occasionally listen to baby's heart tones this whole time, and everything seemed to be totally fine, which was a gift. Yeah, I think that at this point I maybe moved into more like a distinct squat. I was less leaning back and more kind of like leaning up, and I continue to breathe to my body push. I have my notes here because it's hard to remember all of this. And yeah, probably the pushing was my favorite part of labor and experiencing the Ferguson reflex, because of just how powerful that force of like my body taking over and pushing her out was. There was nothing I could do to stop it. I just had to like literally get out of the way and let it happen. And that was insane. It's very similar to the feeling of like puking or something. You can't not do it. Like if you're going to throw up, you're going to throw up most of the time. And you can't make yourself not throw up. That's how it felt when I was pushing. And I just really liked experiencing that sensation as a really like a sense of relief. And I just thought it was so cool. Yeah. So I just felt so calm and relaxed in between contractions. And even during contractions, I felt totally like euphoric. Like I said, I was in labor land. Nothing around me was like phasing me at all. I was just in a different place mentally. I didn't understand a lot about labor physiology and the brain's role and function in labor at that time of my life. I wasn't super educated on that. Now I am, and I understand just how incredible and miraculously the body was designed and the brain was designed to create that protection and that like bubble, that labor land when you're in labor in the right circumstances. Like if you have that much oxytocin going through your body and that is protected, then you also produce so many endorphins that kind of create that labor high and allow you to just feel like you're, like nothing else matters. The world around you melts away and you're just like super hyper focused. And I didn't experience that in my second labor and birth. A lot of things had shifted and changed in my life at this point, and I had since worked more directly in labor and delivery as a nurse. I had become a doula. I had started with all of this online childbirth education stuff, and I didn't have a doula. And I told my midwife that I wanted to be really left alone. And I think I was thinking my way through labor, which is again why it's such an important part of my birth course and a lesson I've learned personally, that you just cannot try to be thinking your way through labor. What you need is to let everything go so that you can get into that labor land, that like peaceful, the world around you doesn't matter state, because labor becomes so much more enjoyable and comfortable that way. And so yeah, that was just really cool and really beautiful. At a certain point, this is where I think the coolest piece of footage that we have is truly probably the most unbelievable moment of my life, or one of them at least. I remember I had a contraction and felt just this like, I don't even know how to describe it. I felt her move down. And I said out loud to my husband, she is going to stay down. But I like push, like you can, before this, you could not tell that I was pushing with contractions. I was completely silent. But I had like a grunt noise, which if you have been to birth, you know that like that's the sound you're looking for. When a mom makes that like sound that's like really like, it's just grunty, And so I made that sound whenever I had a contraction, and I knew that she was about to be born. So I grunted, I had a contraction, and I said, she's going to stay down, to my husband. And he did not hear me because I literally was like, she's going to stay down. And I was like, what? And I didn't even have it in me to like say that again to him. I just said, hey, Nia, which was the name of my midwife. I yelled her name. She came. She squatted by the tub. I told her she's coming. But it was still very peaceful, which thank the Lord for my care team, because they protected the environment so well. So still very peaceful. He invited me at that point to reach down and feel. She didn't even like recommend that she check or anything, which I so appreciate. She said, you want to reach down and feel? And I reached down and her head was right there. And I said, yeah, her head is right there, to Nia. And she looked and she announced to the nurse, she said, she's crowning. And I remember just being so in awe in that moment that I was not in pain.
Yeah. You're awesome. She's gonna stay there. Hey, Nina. I know.
like I want to like laugh about it or be like flippant about it, but the truth is just it's still unbelievable to me that that's something I actually experienced. I didn't go into labor. I've said this now a few times. I didn't go into labor with the expectation that it would be pain-free, but I had prayed for it to be pain-free. And somehow, for some reason, God in his kindness decided that he wanted to give me that gift. And I really hadn't experienced pain leading up to that much, like during the course of my labor. But the fact that my daughter was actively crowning and I still wasn't feeling pain was just shocking. The kindness of God, like I actually can't believe he came through in this way. And I still can't. When I look back to that, I'm just like, I can't believe you decided to give me that experience. It's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about educating women of faith. In particular, as you know, if you're listening to the story, I'm Catholic, and I see in the natural birth world, there's just, the birth gets spiritualized in all the wrong ways. And I understand it because it is one of the most empowering, incredible things to go through. And plenty of women have had pain-free birth experiences like this. But there is a way that it's often talked about that I don't agree with. Yeah, I think this experience was just God and his kindness to me. And I'm so grateful because it truly catapulted like this journey of trusting him as a good father, like really, really. Like I think before this, in concept, I knew that God was a good father. I had been walking with him for quite some time now. I want to say I really had like my conversion in 2015, 2016, and now it was 2022. And so I had been walking with the Lord for a little bit, but I don't think I truly understood and grasped how he wanted to show up for me in the tangible, practical things until this birth. And I mean, there's so much more of my testimony, my husband and I's testimony, and like the walk of radical faith that we have had to, or really been invited to go on with God in the past several years since Abel was born. And this kicked it off. Like this birth kicked it off for me. It kicked off my love, deep passion for the birth process. And really it's the reason why I do what I do now. And I wish that more women were talking about how birth can be with God at the center, because ultimately, like, if you take something away from this video, like, I think it's an incredible, amazing birth story and I love sharing about it. But at the end of the day, God gets all of the glory for this, and it was a gift from him. There was nothing I could have done on my own power. There were a lot of decisions I made that I think facilitated this kind of an experience, but I didn't manifest this for myself. This was something that God gifted me with. So I just want to be clear in that. There's a lot of different discussion in the pain-free birth space. I don't want to label myself as like a pain-free birth mom. I did XYZ to achieve a pain-free birth. Like I didn't achieve this. God just gifted it to me. My second birth, totally different. So I always feel like that's worth putting out there when talking about this story, because it's important. So I felt her crown, called my midwife over, and she said to the nurse, she's crowning. And I looked up at my husband in that moment and I said, it doesn't hurt. And I'm so grateful we got that on video. And I'm going to insert it because it's actually unbelievable. Sometimes when I still think about it, it's easy to be like, was that in my mind? Did I change my definition of pain? And therefore, like, I don't think that I was in pain, but I really was. But no, like, I said it in the moment that she was crowning. And what in my second birth was the most intense, like crazy intense, my gosh moment. In my first birth, I looked up at my husband when my daughter was crowning. I said, it does not hurt. And yeah, I gave one more push. I think that they looked for my daughter's heart tones after maybe they noticed she was crowning. And I think they were having a hard time getting them. But I just knew intuitively, I knew that she was okay. I just knew. And I think that I maybe had another contraction and her head was delivered. I don't even want to say I pushed her out. Like I delivered her. No, it just happened. Her head was delivered and my midwife helped me lift her up out of the water and put her on my chest. And she pretty much immediately cried. She was right on my chest. And yeah, I mean, that was it. Like for the birth, that was it. She was put on my chest and it was so beautiful. What I was shocked by is that I did not have this like elated feeling whenever my daughter was born. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I just did it. In my second birth, I reacted a lot more that way. Like I was a lot more, oh my gosh, oh, like relief. When I had Avila, it was just like so much peace. I just had her, I held her, and I was just like it just felt right. I don't even know. I don't know. That's what happened. So that was the birth. They told me to go ahead and get over to the bed, and her cord was short. So, and that's happened to me now twice. Both of my baby's cords have been short, which is kind of annoying, honestly. So I had a short cord. I kind of couldn't get her past my belly at that point because the cord was too short, but I got up out of the tub and I literally waddled to the bed with her on my belly. I remember it felt so awkward and so weird. Waddled to the bed. Placenta was delivered. They inspected it. You know, we looked at it. It was great. I was breastfeeding Avila. She latched pretty much right away. And I remember though, I was in a lot of pain, like a lot of pain down below. Eventually started to do my repair. I don't think that they voiced any concerns when she was doing the repair, but it was really uncomfortable because they gave me lidocaine, which I have realized since this that I metabolize anesthesia more quickly than the average person. So they gave me lidocaine and I could still kind of feel, which if you imagine you push out a human, you tear, and you feel like a needle with stitches going through, not a good feeling. Very, very unpleasant. By far the most painful part of my labor and birth. Both times, I would say, probably. 2 unmedicated births, both needed repairs, and both times the most uncomfortable part. The second time was much better, but this repair was really hard. So yeah, that was the birth. It was incredible. The postpartum was not as smooth, I will say. I really think, I was sitting here recording and I started to talk all about the postpartum in detail. I think it deserves its own video. I think it deserves to be a story to be told on its own because there's a lot there. But I will say, about 3 hours postpartum, I did hemorrhage. But ultimately, like, praise God, I had an amazing team around me. They handled things very quickly. They were very competent, and I would not have changed anything about the care that I received. I did have to be transferred to the hospital because of the amount of blood that I lost, and they redid my repair in the hospital, which was sad and hard, and my recovery was not very easy. But in all of this, I am so grateful still for the birth experience that I had, because nothing, that could have been very traumatic. And I look back at it and like it was not enjoyable, but my birth was so incredible and so amazing that I still look back at that whole experience, even like postpartum hemorrhage included, with so much awe and so much gratitude. Like I said, it really kicked me into this such a passion for birth and for like facilitating beautiful birth experiences for other women. It's why I do what I do now. It's why I became a doula. And it's why I am continually like trying to educate myself and learn more about birth. And I'm still just like floored by the experience that I had. And ultimately, like I said before, I'm floored by God's goodness and the fact that He gifted me with this kind of a birth experience. So yeah, my camera's about to die. Thank you so much. I hope that this birth story was encouraging to you and that it just gives you peace and confidence and clarity in the fact that you are made to do this and you can have a beautiful, happy, enjoyable, even birth experience. It can be enjoyable and it can be good. Listening to other people's stories edified me and built up my confidence so much in my first pregnancy. And so I hope that this has done the same for you. Thank you again for sticking around. And yeah, you've heard me reference my course multiple times during this birth story. I do have a birth course. It is specifically for Catholic crunchy mamas, pretty much, who are looking to prepare for an unmedicated birth with God at the center. Because like I said, so much of what I see in this natural birth space does not keep God at the center. And I don't think that we need to sacrifice our Catholic faith or our Christian faith for learning all about the physiology of birth the way that God designed it. In fact, I think those things are like 2 wings of the same bird, or 2 sides of the same coin, or however you want to say it. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can check out the link in the description. And thank you again for sticking with me. I hope that this was encouraging for you. I'm going to stop blabbing now because I've been talking for so long, but I'll see you back here next time.